Hello, it's Henry, Blue Review, back again. You know the deal. And it's Halloween, October 31st. At long last, my second favorite high holy day after my birthday. Um, I'm going to talk about three Blu-rays today, all that have Living Dead in the title, and they're connected in various ways. And, I dressed up for the occasion. I'm not going out trick-or-treating or anything. And in Charlotte, it's really too hot. Even still, even in late October, it's still too hot to dress like this outside of the house. So, I'm being kind of a goth here. And this is kind of, if I could dress up every day in ideal climate, then this is how I would just normally dress. So I don't know if that makes me a goth or, goth friendly, whatever. In any case, I am going to cover, first off, the one that started it all, as we all know by now, I believe, was Night of the Living Dead, 1968. And this is the Criterion edition. It's pretty much the last word on the film. They finally did an improved 4K scan, which was a vast improvement even over the nice Millennium DVD scan from around 2001. Anyways, two discs, two Blu-rays, one the film and one it's just loaded with extras. The giant poster here of, I'm not going to unfold all of it, but you won't be able to tell, but maybe I will unfold all of it. How about that? Kyra Sean, aka the little girl who murders her mom with a garden hoe. No jokes, please. And yeah, it's a beautiful package. I don't remember the name of the artist. It wasn't someone I was familiar with. It's kind of in a Bernie Wrightson-ish vein. And I kind of feel as though if he were alive, he might have been considered for the job. It's nice to see a new generation of talent like this. It strikes just the right balance between realism and horror comic art. Quite fond of it. So, Night of the Living Dead. Everyone's seen it, I'm assuming, here. What if you haven't seen it? Well, I don't know. There's really no hope for you. But anyway, there's always tomorrow. There's always now. You could watch it right this minute. And since it's October 31st, Halloween, you should watch it today. This is my favorite go-to every year Halloween movie. I really can't not watch it then, and I sometimes watch it a time or two during the year, just on principle because I love it. It's in my top 15, I guess, all-time favorite films. Dawn of the Dead is my number 2 and my favorite horror film. I don't have Dawn of the Dead on Blu-ray because there hasn't been a Region A friendly release that's remained in print that's definitive of the film. There was the Nicholas Winding Refn set, which I thought gave too much credit to Dario Argento for his contributions to the film, which were great, but not to the level that his mythologizers like to credit him with. He's done other brilliant things apart from Romero, not subtracting from the man's oeuvre, but Romero is the auteur of Dawn of the Dead and not Argento, regardless of what he did with the cut over in Italy and parts of Europe. That set is pricey and elusive, and supposedly it does have the other cuts, but I wanted to get a real Dawn of the Dead set. I have a really, really nice DVD fold-out package, and it's even signed in silver ink by Tom Savini and Ken Foree when I met them at Mad Monster Party a few years ago. The event, not the film that I just covered, the name for it. So, essentially, Night. Yeah, like I said, no, no Dawn Super Duper Blu-ray. There was an early one, I think by Blue Underground, I think, or Anchor Bay. And a friend of mine, Tim Tolbert, I believe, does possess this. And, he lives in Pennsylvania, very close to some areas where a lot of this, the Legend of George Romero and his Dead films, were spawned, where most of them were filmed. Uh, and my ex-wife actually also was from, I believe, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, perhaps. She's not probably not going to be watching this and correcting me in the comments, but you never know. Um, but anyway, she also toured Monroeville Mall, where Dawn of the Dead was largely shot, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're not here to talk about Dawn of the Dead or any of the movies that end with "of the Dead," like Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, etc. by Romero. We're here to talk about movies with living dead in the title that aren't cheap knockoffs and retitles of European horror films like Fangs of the Living Dead is. I believe that's a retitling of Metlinka by Armando de Osorio. Watch me, butcher his name. He did the Blind Dead films, of course, but these three films are all intricately related, intimately related, and not enough has been discussed about how one of them is related to it. So let's just start with Night. Hold it up one more time. And if you just came in late, so Night of the Living Dead was part of the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. It was of its time, and yet timeless. Romero was the first one to make zombies these flesh-eating ghouls, as he originally called them, and cannibals, and they could be killed by being shot in the head or smashed in the head. Those are the basic rules, the basic parameters. They bite you, you turn in a few days to a zombie. It's inevitable. He established the groundwork. The TV series The Walking Dead essentially takes place in a Romero universe. I don't necessarily believe it's the same one that Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and Land of the Dead take place in, but a parallel one. Certainly, Robert Kirkman has owned up to the fact that he pretty much lock, stock, and barrel took the blueprint of these films for his comic book, The Walking Dead, which became the series. And of course, Greg Nicotero, who helped develop the series, did makeup on the later Dead movies with Romero as part of K&B, so who were kind of like the heirs to Savini, effects-wise, makeup effects. Night was much more primitive, and it started out as there's like a short story treatment called Night of Anubis, and then they were going to film it from the screenplay written by John Rousseau with George Romero, and that screenplay, the working title of the film, here we go again. I know, you guessed it, I forgot. I have such a great memory, but I don't know. I'm not perfect. I believe it was something about ghouls. I could be wrong, but it was a kind of or flesh eaters, Night of the Flesh. I don't know. It was very generic. It would not have been as cool sounding over time. So finally, they arrived at the iconic Night of the Living Dead, which essentially was the same story as Night of Anubis, Anubis being the Egyptian god of the dead. I like the title Night of Anubis too, myself, and actually there's a work print included in this package that, more or less could be called the Night of Anubis print. It's interesting to see the subtle differences in it, and that's really all they are, subtle. The picture quality is rough. The remastering of the main film in this Criterion edition is pristine, however, and the blacks are really, really dark black, and the lights and the grays and the gradations are all perfectly graded. It's just is stunning. So you can throw away all those old videotapes. You can even throw away, or you could sell, like I did, the Millennium DVD. I didn't get much for it, but it's fairly common. But this to me is the final word, and I'm so happy to have this. I guess I've had this for maybe 2 Halloweens, 3 Halloweens now, since I bought it at a half off Barnes and Noble Criterion sale in, I guess, 2017. Um, I've covered those sales on the very recent video, and talked about some similar sales that I got recently. So Night of the Living Dead was the first horror film to have a black protagonist, and it in some ways was one of the first genre films ever to have a black protagonist. And Dwayne Jones was cast because they knew him. He was a great actor. He himself is really nothing like Ben, except for his acerbic, kind of, snide, cynical, skeptical view of human nature and of those around him. He conveys a lot of that in Ganja and Hess as well, albeit playing a more elitist, doctor, archaeologist, anthropologist kind of character, super cultured. In this, Ben is like kind of like an ordinary man, but he's intelligent and resourceful, and black men weren't portrayed that way enough as the leads in films during the 60s, much less before. They were either partners with the white guy, or they were the heroes, but they were kind of scrappy and funky. And of course, that continued into the 70s with blaxploitation. Ben is just a person, regardless of his color, and it's never mentioned in the film. You can read undercurrents, though, into it, especially the ending of the movie. Very much so. At least I did the first time I saw the movie, and I had read virtually nothing about any kind of text or subtext of the film at that time. That was about 1984 when I first saw it. I didn't like gory movies then. I avoided them. I eschewed gory movies. I was happily surprised that the cut I was watching on TV was only missing a few seconds of naked zombies, female zombies behind. The eating scene was pretty much the same. The obligatory chow down scene that slows the movie down and just becomes its own gruesome set piece. Romero has it in all of the Dead movies, and of course in each one it becomes more and more grotesque. Land of the Dead, I think it kind of it didn't have enough of a classic scene like that, of carnage concentrated in one scene, as the ones in Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. And it began in Night of the Living Dead. This is important because I'm going to get back to a lot of these points when we get to the second movie I'm reviewing. So, I do have a method to this madness. Well, Ben is the hero in the sense that he's resourceful, and he actually can lead these other people he can keep his head pretty level under stress as they're being besieged by these flesh-eating ghouls. He knows kind of the basic survival strategies. He's like a lot of men of his generation, of any color, who were, they just learned a lot of basic skills that my generation and the millennials on, have not so much favored. We're a little more inept about such manly things, and I'm not saying that's good or bad. That's no value judgment. It's just simply an observation. I personally, never had interest in survivalist kind of techniques, though I've acquired a small interest in it as I've gotten older and the world gets scarier, but it's not a full-on thing for me. It wasn't a full-on thing for Ben either, but he had the accrued knowledge to handle the situation, to keep calm, to try to keep others calm. And of course, Barbara, whose brother is slain in the beginning by the first zombie that appears, she goes loco and never recovers. She pitches in a little bit at the very, very end when it's just all but too late for them. Ben's fate is tragic, and all the more so, and that he was the hero, and he was unheralded. The redneck sheriff and his posse are coming to clean up the landscape of these zombies by shooting them in the head because, like he says, shoot them in the head, beat them or burn them. They go down fast, and, they move slowly. They're dead. They're all messed up. So, all of these classic lines in this movie, by the way, those are among them. The sheriff shoots Ben, thinking he's a zombie, just seeing movement in the house, not even hypothesizing that it could be a human survivor. And he's like, there he is, right between the eyes. Boom! And that's the end, not the very end of the movie, but that's the end of Ben. And it's still intense to me. And I've seen this movie, I would say I've seen this film more times than any feature-length film in my life. Probably close to 100 times. Now, I know people who've seen some movies, for instance, Rocky Horror Picture Show, hundreds and even thousands of times, but I would rather see more different films in one lifetime than watch the same films over and over and over again. But there are some I return to, and this happens to be one of them. It just never gets old for me. It's always a fresh experience, and I'm always sucked into the intrigue and the surprises, and I'm rooting for Ben and to a lesser extent Barbara and Mr. Cooper's wife, Mrs. Cooper. I like her too. The two young characters, Frankie and Johnny, or no, I don't know, Judy and Tom. They, they're fine, but they meet tragic ends and trying to survive. This movie is the blueprint for all of this. It's like we're going to make a run for it and get such and such. In this case, like gasoline, and then there's a torch involved, and then boom, everybody's moving. It's sloppy, and then the Ben gets back in the house, and then the zombies. That's when they have their extended feast, and that's when we finally see them really eating human flesh, and they're very voracious. These zombies look and move a bit differently than the ones in Dawn and Day, much less Land, where you had kind of a certain type, you had a certain cohesion to it. Romero was new to this. He was experimenting, trying different things. For instance, in the beginning, the first zombie begins running manically after Barbara after he's killed her brother. Now, you would think a zombie in Dawn would, first of all, be moving a lot slower. Second of all, would probably have stopped to grab a few hunks off of Barbara's brother's corpse to chow on. But instead, he seems to have this obsessive need to run after Barbara and try to smack her, even with a brick through her car door window. And it's very odd. But then as the movie settles in, you see the kind of archetypal, very slow moving to where they can get around them. For instance, when Ben has a makeshift torch, he's able to ward them off. They are afraid of fire, or at least it repels them. I don't know if they're capable of emotion like fear per se. That we still haven't defined at this level in the franchise what their brain capacity is or isn't. If they're just motor instinct and craving for flesh, or if there's something else there. And of course, all that is discussed and, pardon the pun, dissected in great detail in Day of the Dead much later. So let me stay on track with The Living Dead. I'm not doing too good a job of that, but I promise I will. So, Night is a classic, and Dawn came out in 1978, I believe, 79. 10 years after, not the band, 10 years after Night of the Living Dead. and a lot of change. Romero had upped his game, and it was in color. It was extremely gory, gruesome. It also had many more characters and incidences and action. It takes the survival thing to a whole nother level. It's not just a small group of people trapped in a cabin. It's four people who you really come to care about. Two of whom are highly trained SWAT officers who take over a sprawling mall and use it as their base of operation. Though acquiring the mall is not without its risks, and it does cost them ultimately the life of one of their own. Um, but then of course they get disrupted. Their idyllic little brief time in the mall with all the consumer, uh, everything you could ever want basically is in the mall. So they could live there the rest of their lives technically. Um, Before Dawn, though, 4 years before it came out, 4 or 5 years before it came out, 1974, there was another film that isn't really talked about in the context as much as I'd like to hear it talked about. There probably are 20 essays, and I'm just not aware of them. So if so, I apologize to all of those dutiful authors, but I just want to lay it out here in conversation, and just to provoke some thought, share some ideas. Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, 1974. The Italian and Spanish titles both translate as Do Not Profane the Sleep of the Dead. You could say Don't Disturb the Sleep of the Dead. And it's kind of colloquially translated commonly as Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, which is, a poem on Let Sleeping Dogs Lie. And that's perfect. And the first DVD edition of this film was Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. But now it's officially in its various iterations through Blue Underground, and there's a super special deluxe Blu-ray one, and I want to say Severin is doing it. I could be wrong, but I want to say Severin is doing it. It's a steel book with multiple discs and stuff. I couldn't afford it. It just wasn't on my slate. So instead, I acquired a very inexpensive copy of Blue Underground's release of it from several years back, and I acquired this just earlier this year on eBay, and it's fine. It looks fantastic. It looks better than the DVD I had. It's the sound is great, and I have no problem with it. The retitling is fine because, when I first heard of this movie was 1992, and a good friend of mine, Tim McQueen, had loaned another friend of ours a catalog from this bootleg video company, Mondo Video, and it was the beginning of everything for me in this area. All these titles, all these directors' names, and these movies' names, and these crazy ideas, and I was like, this is a whole new vista for me, man, and I haven't looked back since. It's almost 30 years, and I'm obsessed with this stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know if I need treatment or what, but the thing is, um, Living Dead at Manchester Morgue was one of the titles offered in this catalog. It was a very memorable title to me. And my my friend I was reading it with, he said sometimes it's known as Breakfast at Manchester Morgue, and he was being very hyperbolic and throwing in a lot of urban legends, things that mostly didn't check out over the years. None of us really knew better back then. A lot of misinformation and even some disinformation got out among fan circles. But now you can see the films as they're intended, and that's what brings me to this, The Living Dead of Manchester Morgue Blu-ray, which I already discussed its existence. Let me talk about the movie itself. Um, it's a mirror of Night of the Living Dead. Um, Jorge Grau, the director, he's Spanish, very good director. He was approached to do a Romero-like film, and Night of the Living Dead was a film he loved. And it was going to be a film kind of patterned after Night of the Living Dead. And then other projects came up, and then it came around again, and it was like, okay, so now we're going to do like a color tribute slash pastiche of Night of the Living Dead. Most people do not regard this film as that, though. They see that it's different enough for many reasons, in many ways, to constitute its own separate film, and it is, and I agree with that. But I will contend that it's a remake of Night of the Living Dead. There are some shots in common. There are a lot of the motifs. The let's run and get such and such before they get us, and then it goes afoul. There's a lot of the kind of the lumbering zombies that are kind of slow moving, occasionally fast, inexplicably, kind of like in Night of the Living Dead. Um, there are some other conventions, um, such as they can spread the plague by taking the blood of a living victim and anointing a corpse. So this makes you wonder, what is their intelligence level? What is their motivation? Obviously, eating is the main one. They're cannibals also. They can also be killed by being shot in the head or smashed in the head. Um, there are, though that really doesn't seem to happen uh, with any kind of regularity. I'm not really sure. It seems that way, that that's a rule in this film too, but I don't really. The characters don't take advantage of it or figure it out very well. Um, it's also they're brought to life by an ultrasonic uh, scanning device that is supposed to kill insects without using chemicals, insecticides. It's just ultrasonic radiation. Uh, so this apparently somehow brings the dead back to life. It reanimates their brains. Um, it affects them the way it does, the insects and such, but they are stirred to life. This, of course, is scientifically, not even remotely plausible, even from a science fiction point of view. But let's go with it, man. Because in the beginning, they said Night of the Living Dead, not the beginning of the movie, but in that movie, it was like the Venus probe, which crashed, and radiation may have brought the zombies back, brought the ghouls to life, and the radiation affected the brain. So if you kill the brain, you kill the ghoul. Well, the thing is, um, Romero himself plays a journalist who's asking some of these Pentagon bigwigs about this link between this Venus probe and the radiation and the ghouls returning to life, and it's kind of one of his lines is to the effect that maybe it's not responsible for it, maybe we really don't know or won't know, and Romero himself picks that thread specifically for the next three films in his series, in which he's basically saying we don't know how it happened. And in Day of the Dead, there's even the frustration of our lead character, scientist Sarah, played by Laurie Cardille, who was like, we spent too much time trying to uh, figure out why it happened, when we should be dealing with it, and that's true, and by that time humanity's outnumbered by the zombies. So, but that's Romero's series of sequels. I'm here to talk about the two other series of remakes slash sequels. So they all have Living Dead in the title. So coming back to Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, I consider it a remake. You have kind of an unconventional hero, not a young black guy in this case, but a kind of a hippie-ish guy who works in a antiquities store, and he's fairly intelligent. He's very cynical, so sometimes you can't really tell how intelligent he actually is, but he is, and he also seems kind of like a jerk a lot of the time, especially to the heroine Edna, played by Christine Galbo, and she's beautiful in this movie, by the way, playing a ginger. That's not her natural coloring, but she looks great with that look, and a very distinctive look. And our main character, George, played by Ray Lovelock, our hippie antiquity dealer, he is continually frustrated by Edna. He's frustrated by everything that's going on around him. So he kind of comes across as kind of a whiny jerk, but ultimately he rises to the occasion and uses his noggin to survive and to help Edna survive. and they form kind of a bond. Of course, there's that little undercurrent of, this might turn into a romance if such and such continues on, but tragedy strikes as always in these films. And this film is no exception. It's no different than Night of the Living Dead. Our hero is shockingly, surreptitiously dispatched by authority figures. And, one in particular who has been mouthing off the whole movie about how the permissive rot and awful perverted values of the long haired hippies and every manner of perversion and Satanism and blah, 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 blah. So, he's got this Arthur Kennedy, a pretty respected actor. I believe he dubs his own voice in this, and has this kind of extremely over the top Scottish accent, and I think it's supposed to be Scottish. And he's really one of the most repellent characters you're ever going to find in a film. He is the right man, the arch conservative, the ultimate bad cop character, and but unlike in Night of the Living Dead, which ends with us being resigned to the fact that, well, all of our heroes are dead, even though they seem to be containing the zombie plague. None of our people we've sweated and suffered and empathized with through the film are there to enjoy the rewards. And Ben may have been not considered a human as much as if he had been a white man that the sheriff saw through the rifle sight. George is considered non-human by the lunatic cop, and but he's the most reasonable character, much like Ben was in Night of the Living Dead. He's another outsider character, seemingly, but ends up becoming the one who can try to solve some of the problems, or at least ameliorate the hard effects of what's happening. And he as the film goes on, his brain, starts kind of moving faster and faster as he's seeing this, and he doesn't question it anymore. Like, oh, this can't be happening, blah, 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 like almost every other character is doing. He's just like, it's happening. This is why it happened. This is what's happening. We need to stop this. And we need to go right to the source and stop it. We need to stop it, the repercussions of it, where they spring up. And, he's on top of it, but, he's one man, and half the movie he's on foot. His motorcycle gets smashed in the beginning by Edna, and that's how they form their kind of contentious alliance. Edna is a great character, but she does scream and cry an enormous amount and whimper and beg George for help, but the voice dubbing on her character is it's good, it's sympathetic, it's not almost too over the top, but not quite. Seems to know when to pull back, just that moment where you're like, shut up, or don't be such a stereotypical female old school character in a horror movie. And George, he is Ray Lovelock, who is Italian. He is dubbed by a kind of almost Cockney accented guy. This takes place in London, or near London, and it was shot in England, even though, like I said, Grau is Spanish. And the voice for George is great. He's got that kind of cynical viewpoint that he throws around, but then he's also kind of the guy who's saying, we're all in danger. You've got to listen, and nobody wants to listen, and I don't know. Isn't that kind of what the hippies were trying to tell the establishment, back then? And no one listened. So, this is a kind of cool movie that has a lot of subtext, just like Night of the Living Dead, and it has almost all the plot touchstones of Night of the Living Dead. The characters don't all correspond exactly, but That's okay. It is its own beast. One thing I want to say is, before I move on to the next film, is that the strongest case to be made for Living Dead at Manchester Morgue as part of this lineage is not only that it's kind of a remake, in my opinion, is a semi remake of Night of the Living Dead, but that it amps the gore uh, many, many times over. Gianetto De Rossi, who went on to do some of Fulci's best gore films, did the effects makeup, and the cannibalism and such is gruesome. The disemboweling, it's all pretty graphic. Not only for a film of its time, but it was probably the first film featuring these exact kind of creatures that were originated in Night of the Living Dead, doing these gruesome things on camera. Now, if you grew up with, Night and Dawn and you never saw this film, you wouldn't know that. You'd think Dawn was the one that pushed it to the next level. Romero himself did it. But actually, no. This is kind of a bridge between Night and Dawn as far as the level of violence and brutality, cannibalism, the explicit effects. Um, they're pretty wet and splattery. And I have to say that this film does not get enough credit for that, at least from what I've read or encountered. You can correct me in the comments, and if so, if you are able to or inclined to do so. But the deal is that it has its place. It has its place in this lineage of films. Um, the next film has a more concrete place in this lineage of films, but it is not one of Romero's follow-ups either. Came out in 1985, I believe, and it's just one of those films that another one I rarely get tired of. I first saw it on somewhat cut on television in the late 80s, and then rented it a few years later, and then eventually owned it on DVD, and then I got the Shout Factory Blu-ray in 2018. It's Return of the Living Dead, or The Return of the Living Dead. So a little bit of background. John Russo wrote the script for Night of the Living Dead and produced the film for Romero, but Russo also did a novelization of it, which he wrote by himself. And then he did a sequel to the novelization called Return of the Living Dead. It had a totally different plot than this film, and it was a little more in line with some of the ideas of Night. He wanted to make it into a movie, and of course, him and Romero had kind of a little mini feud over who's going to call their movie what. But in the end, it was decided that Russo would call his films Of the Living Dead, and Romero would call his Of the Dead. So that's how they split into two branches. Return of the Living Dead is very much, even though he altered the story quite a bit and brought in Dan Bannon to write and direct, from Alien and other projects, a brilliant writer, no longer with us. Even at that, it is very much a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. It's like a parallel sequel to Dawn of the Dead. So it there, in that sense, it carries a little bit of filial relation also to Living Dead at Manchester Morgue. Return of the Living Dead is in many ways a comedy. It does have some dramatic elements. It has an enormous amount of horror and gore and crazy effects and crazy creatures. It kind of shatters a lot of the mythology of Night of the Living Dead while still acknowledging it. In other words, it does this kind of thing that some friends of mine call creative mythography, among other appellations. And one thing is that you have a fictional text, and it's allegedly based on a real incident. The text exaggerated it. Philip Jose Farmer took this kind of reasoning to a supreme art form. I discussed a lot of this in my Flickr Street videos because I've been known to do some of this myself with Flickr Street. So the conceit of Return of the Living Dead is that Night of the Living Dead was not just a movie that our characters saw. It really happened. However, It didn't happen in the state of Pennsylvania, and the dead were brought to life by a chemical called trioxin, and that was the reason they came back to life. And once it was contained, the corpses were rounded up and put into tanks, and made inert, and so they couldn't come back again or spread the plague any further. So here you go, almost 20 years later, and we realize that, okay, so this movie happened, but obviously Dawn of the Dead on this timeline could not happen. There was no apocalypse. Life went on as we know it, and this was kept top secret by the highest levels of the United States government. And unfortunately, some of our kind of slightly bumbling main characters, played by James Karen, and his assistant, I forgot his name, but they both play these kind of, they're like morgue attendants. I mean, basically, there's like a resurrection cemetery, and then very near it, there's like a little morgue, and there's a place where they embalm people. So it's kind of a, all in one place here. It's kind of convenient, and that makes it also, unfortunately, convenient for the dead to rise from that cemetery and assault our hapless protagonists over here at the mortuary. So that's what the movie's about, and their attempt to survive, and kind of going from room to room and place to place, and again, like, can we risk going outside? And no, we're assaulted by the zombies. In this movie, the zombies move very fast. I think this was the first like really fast moving zombie film. That's become its own modern cliche now, and it's not something Romero himself was pleased with. But Return is where it started, as far as I know. I mean, like I said, there's some speediness occasionally on display in Night and Manchester Morgue, but these characters are just wild, rabid, running, maddened crowds of zombies. The other thing is they're thinking. They're not only just thinking, but at least we've learned from a couple of them that they can speak. At least 3 or 4 of them have lines in the film. One has a few lines, and so they're aware that they're dead. They're aware of their own existence. So O'Bannon starts getting into more of the mythology of this. What are these ground rules for this group of zombies? What are the ground rules for the real zombies that were fictionalized in that film, Night of the Living Dead? Well, okay, so it's brilliant. It's a brilliant idea, and it's brilliantly executed. This movie never stops to take a breath, really. It's either, out of control, shocking, crazy, and violent, or hilarious and ridiculous and absurdist. And there's a lot of brilliant touches throughout the movie that sell you on this world as being like the real Night of the Living Dead universe. In other words, O'Bannon thinks things through to a very minute degree here. For instance, when trioxin is first released at the mortuary, the dead come to life, and it's all of the dead come to life. So you have a place where there's like medical supplies and equipment, and James Karen is training his protege on this stuff. So you have like a split dog, and it comes back to life, and it barks, which I laugh every time I see it, or obviously even think about it. A lot of butterflies in a display, they all come to life, but they're pinned, but their wings are flapping. So this thing is like potent. It's far more potent and dangerous, really, than the hazardous, not hazardous, the haphazard way that the plague is spread in Romero's films. because the other thing is you can't destroy these zombies, and that's why they're in these tanks. I mean, because they could have just shot them in the head, and that would have been that, right? You know, if that movie was telling the truth. But you know, as James Cameron's assistant says, "You mean the movie lied?" And you know, yeah, the movie lied. I mean, you can chop them up, and the pieces will still be there. We're wriggling around. They try everything, and then it starts to get completely out of hand because they cremate um, a zombie, and unfortunately, even the residue gets into the atmosphere, and there's a storm. And of course, where does the rain fall? In the cemetery. And then corpses aplenty dig their way out. Into the mix of all this comes this group of maybe high school aged, college aged kids who are kind of like different kinds of misfits. Each one's like an archetype kind of misfit from high school. There's like a new wave chick played by uh, what's her name? Shepard. I forgot her first name. My brain is blanking out. And Linnea Quigley plays a punk rock, kind of death rock chick. And then there's a punk rock dude. He's hardcore. He's named Suicide. And Quigley's character's named Trash. And, you know, then there's kind of like a nerdy, dorky guy. You know, then there's kind of like your average kind of preppy girl who happens to be the girlfriend of Freddie. I remember his name, the morgue assistant, and that's kind of one reason they're there. It's like, you know, Freddie works here. We're gonna come see Freddie. We're gonna hang out, and we're gonna hang out in the cemetery because it's cool. And you know, obviously the characters like Trash and Suicide are getting off on the whole thing and of being in this kind of scenario. And there's another punk rock guy too who lasts a bit longer than Trash and Suicide in the story, and he's pretty cool. Um, but there's also their one black friend who is with them, and he's dressed in really cool outfit. It's kind of hard to describe. He's got like I think he's got like a scarf tied around his neck and an open shirt with no sleeve, you know, cut off sleeves, and then he's got kind of like parachute pants. And he's a trip. He is the one among all the teenagers, or whatever age they are, the kids, the new wave kids. He's the one among them that thinks rationally about all of this. He actually tries to put his head together with um, the people who own the mortuary. You know, they come to see what's going on. One played by Clu Gulager, and then his buddy played by Don Calfa. And you know, those two are hilarious, especially Don Calfa. He's hysterical. And you know, they're trying to figure out what the fuck to do, man. And they're getting picked off one by one. And some of them do come back as zombies themselves. Um, I don't know. It's a frantic film. I'm sure a lot of you watching this have seen this movie. It was very, very popular when it came out, and it's been persistently popular over the last 30 odd years. So I'm very proud to have this nice Shop Factory Scream Factory Collector's Edition. This is the one I recommend people get. There's a couple of them out there, versions, but this one has the most extras, 2 discs, and really has the definitive 2K scan restoration of the inner positive. So I recommend it. So yeah, these 3 films are interconnected. You know, Night spawned not only, you know, its own direct sequels, but it spawned other, you know, semi remakes and parallel sequels. I could get into all of that and how all of that is interconnected, and it crossed my mind, but I might get some of the facts wrong because it's extremely convoluted. Someone did a chart, like a family tree, Venn diagram kind of chart of all these movies and how they're connected, what spawned what's canon on one line, and then what's canon on the other. And that was very cool. I wish I had a copy of that. I should have downloaded it. But um, I just want to thank everyone for listening. And I want to say that this is going to be my longest blue review to date, but I did cover 3 films, 3 kind of epic films, and I'm not sure my coverage was all that epic, but hey, I did dress up for the occasion, so give me a few points here. And I want to say that I love doing these videos. I hope you guys get something out of them, maybe some information, some recommendations, maybe a laugh or two at my expense, or something of substance, and something amusing and entertaining. So because I'm going to keep doing them, and they're yeah. So I love you guys. Happy Halloween. Do something incredible tonight and fun.